Well, hello, everyone. This is Michael Rochelle from Brandon Hall Group. Thanks for joining us today for our roundtable sponsored by ELB Learning. How do you upskill and reskill your learning and development team for the future of work? And I'm joined here by some terrific experts that I think you're going to find will give us a very engaging discussion and try to answer many of the questions. I want to be able to give each person a chance to introduce themselves. So if we can go start with John and then Dre, Gregg, Christy, please jump in.
Sure. Hey, everybody, I'm John Blackmon. I'm the CTO here at ELB Learning and also the creator of Scenario VR and Lectora.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dre Zilla. I'm recent to ELB Learning, doing a short contract with them. I was with Google Cloud for the last couple of years, and before that, 5 years with LinkedIn, working in their sales enablement group.
Hey, good morning, good day, everyone. My name is Gregg Eiler. I'm the Learning Design Manager over at Lululemon.
And hi, everyone. I'm Christy from ELB Learning, and John was actually my CEO at Trivantis. I specialize in driving technology adoption.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to kind of jump into the logistics of what we'll be covering today, which I think you'll find. And thanks everyone for filling out all of the questions. Great responses. Really want you to throw in on the chat section at any time. We've got Christy's moderating here as well. Just want to be able to answer everything you have to say, but we're going to start out with poll questions. So if people don't remember, there are 2 rhetorical questions asked in the abstract. Inquiring minds want to know. So we actually are going to launch those as poll questions and see how the audience answers those 2 questions. So we're going to start there. Okay, so the first question is, your learning and development team struggling to adapt to the demands of a challenging economic conditions? So if you can just jump in, answer yes, no, we'll give it a minute or so and see how people answer. Okay, well, we've got kind of a 2-to-1, probably isn't a surprise to anyone in the audience that we are all facing these struggles on the demands based on a VUCA environment that we still live in from a learning and development team function standpoint. And we'll be talking more about that as we get into our actual roundtable discussion. But I'd like to launch the second question. Is your learning and development team expected to do more with less, yet deliver a compelling return on investment? Boy, that's a loaded question. Now that I read it to myself again. I wonder who came up with that question. Okay, so let's see how the audience feels about this question. And I just want to let you know that 93% plus 8% in this world adds up to 100%. But overwhelmingly, we have folks that are answering yes. And so I think we all share in the fact that we're being asked to do more with less and show our strategic value to the organization. So I think the table's set, and I think we're ready to go. What I'd like to share with you next is, if you probably remember when you were registering for the roundtable, we asked you some speed round questions. And we wanted to share with you those results. And then we're going to jump into the actual roundtable, and our team of experts are going to be able to weigh in on both the poll questions and the registration questions. So let's take up the first question from the registration. So we had 73% of folks say that your learning strategy is somewhat effective. So that's not where we want it to be, obviously. We only had 22% as a flip side to that, saying that they are being effective with their learning strategy. And I think, again, it's not due to lack of effort, but we're all trying to figure out, how do you have an effective and efficient learning strategy in this very inclement conditions we call the work environment? Let's go to the next question that was answered. And here we're talking about readiness again. Future work, put in that vein, 60% say somewhat ready, 25% say ready. So we have the same split as we did on the first slide, where I think we're staying pretty clear that we're really struggling with the fact of how can we be not retrospective about our learning efforts, but prospective. And because future work, I think if we could have a whole webinar just on the power of those three words and how everyone interprets those three words, I think it could create for an interesting conversation. Let's go to the next one. Does your organization feel that learning and development organization is delivering a strong ROI? A little different than the poll question. Poll question was a little bit more challenging as far as the no's on that. But overall, it should be 100%. I think we all agree. And what do we need to do in order to get there? And I think that's what our team of experts are going to help us answer today. And the question that's on top of everyone's mind, do we need help in the retooling? And again, that's going to be the heart of our conversation. And it's a resounding 3-to-1, so to speak, on people saying, yes, I need some sort of help. Question is, what is the right kind of help? And who's the right organization to work with? And we hope we'll bring answers to both of those questions at the end of the roundtable. Modalities is very interesting right now. And I think part of what Christy's always brought up to me, we've had many conversations about this, that feel of relying on 80–90% of your learning and instructor-led training and e-learning doesn't feel comfortable anymore, yet we continue to do it. You know, and it's old habits are hard to break. And I think where we see the opportunities, and we were just talking about this in what we call the secret Brandon Hall Group green room approach to the speakers, is like, we want to see more of that augmented reality, virtual reality, gaming, simulation climbing in terms of usage, because it's a highly effective way of learning. And we're going to get into that. So don't feel badly that if you're one of those 91%ers or 89%ers, but we're hoping that today's discussion will help you to evolve your thinking and see how this can have a dramatic impact on your learning and development team. This was an interesting piece of information too. I think outsourcing, and I know it was kind of like a general question, and a lot of people can debate what the definition of outsourcing, a little bit, a lot. But what's interesting is the fact that technology is something that we've seen, right? SaaS technology, not as much on-premise, third-party solutions, we get that. Content development is climbing precipitously, and so is actually training or outsourcing. So we're beginning to feel the vibration effect of, can I get it all done with the learning team that I have? Even if they were superstars and highly trained and ready to go, can I really deal with all of the volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, and speed of business requirements of learning? And I think that sets the table for our group of experts to talk that out today. So here we are. Let's get it started. So a lot of data and information. Team ELB, we just threw that all out. Who wants to jump in and offer some commentary, get the dialogue started?
I think the first place to start would be on that one where we at least had 101% of responses. and 93% agree that they're being asked to do more with less, and they're not really keeping up. And it's not just training, obviously, that's happening on. It's happening in a lot of areas. Right? So how do you deal with that? How do you get more with less? I think that's definitely a great place to start. I mean, I have an opinion on that. I think the best way is to look at newer technologies. It's not just more with less. It's also your team is different than it was a few years ago. You know, everyone is remote, whereas before you had a lot of people on site and you could train them. Really hard to do in person. ILT is next to impossible these days when everybody's spread out all over the place. And so there's a lot of challenges ahead, and the new people that you're training, they're constantly getting, you know, YouTube feeds and Instagram and things, and they're expecting that level of creativity in their training as well. So I mean, it's a lot of different factors all rolling up that gets us that 93%. Right? So how do you solve it? You know, what do you do?
Yeah, I can tell you some of the things that we're doing, John, is leaning into bringing in talent from the outside on contract basis. That's where we'll use ELB quite a bit, and try to scale up when we can, and then kind of level off. You know, we haven't leveled off yet, One of the realities that we run into is this idea of how do you do more? We sit around and go, well, when will more stop? And it doesn't stop. And there's at some point you're just going to reach this, zero sum gain, and there's just no return anymore because the business wants more and more and more, and they'll keep telling you it's training, and learning. And I think a lot of us know it's often not, but if they only have a hammer to walk around with, they're going to find nails, right? They're just going to keep beating on those things. So where we're trying to get better is helping them with that story and say, well, let's talk about bandwidth, and let's talk about what people can actually retain and things like that. What's the most important thing to you? And then give them options. Well, yeah, we can help you out. We don't have any internal team to do it, but if you're willing to throw dollars at it, we'll bring in some experts, and we've been real fortunate with that. We've gotten really good people that have helped us through those times.
Have you looked at any other modalities, maybe changing up how you do training?
Yeah, you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I was looking back on this e-learning piece, and I've been at this long enough to know, we got into e-learning because it was cost effective, scalability. One of the things that we have to look at quite a bit is we have to translate everything that we do into 7, sometimes 10 different languages. So you can imagine what that would look like if you were trying to use any other modality other than like a cut and paste e-learn or something like that. Even when you start to tap into video, which we've tried before, somebody needs to edit that video. So we've tried them all. And that's why you and I were talking earlier. Hey, are we getting close? Are we getting close where we're going to start seeing a tipping point where the costs will come down on some of those things? And what's the best use case for it? We're not quite there yet, but we keep pushing on that invisible wall a little bit.
That's somewhere where perhaps AI might even help. So if you're trying to do video and you need to translate it in 7 languages, you can use an AI, avatar to do it, and then have that avatar speak it and translate it in 7 different languages. There's a lot of possibilities there.
There is, yeah.
I'll jump in. Where I've seen a lot of advantage to try to help get more things done is by, to John's point, investing in technology, but mixing the technologies up. Right. So part of it is using different technologies, and part of it is deploying strategically and smartly, and being consciously aware that people are attached to their devices. To Michael's point, where we were talking about, there's YouTube videos and all sorts of things that are just at people's fingertips. How do you get people engaged? What do our leaders mean when they say do more with less? Are we looking for more engagement? Are we looking for more return? Being an L&D is interesting, right? Because there's a part of us that has to constantly prove our worth. Yet we don't have true causality. We have correlation, right? We haven't got to that causality thing yet. But if you can mix things up and give your learners a learning journey that they can own, and you can spread it out, use e-learning still, but smartly. Use it when it's broadcast only, but mix and match the social, bring in some of the simulation, learn things in the flow of work. You will be able to do more with less. And you'll also need less of people's time out of seat, which is another pain that happens. My 2 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's the other side of the coin, is it's not just your time, it's their time. Right. And you gotta be really mindful of that as well.
I think
Christy, any thoughts? Yeah. Jump in.
I think that's why I was so surprised to see that the numbers weren't higher for VR and for games. They were somewhat high for collaborative technologies, which makes sense because when you use even some of our products or any products out there, you can do things that are similar to Pinterest and things you do in social media where you tag stuff you save to your boards and whatnot. But as humans, we're conditioned to need something really aggressive and sort of like a game or VR to get results. And I have found that clients or people I've seen measure them, they get really strong ROI. So I'm not sure why things like XAPI hasn't taken off and certain metrics aren't looked at as closely, but I bet all of you can probably explain why analytics are not used more heavily.
I'd love to find the reason why XAPI hasn't taken off yet, because I still don't understand that. It has been around since 2014. And it obviously is a much better way to do what we all do every day. And it gives you so much more information. It is coming around a little bit. We are seeing it being adopted by more and more LMSs. You're seeing better, stronger reporting because of it, but it's still going slower than it should, without question.
Yeah, Christy, I wonder if it's, sorry, Michael, I wonder if it's awareness too. Yeah, we're so knee deep in our work all day long. You talk to me about VR. If I turn on the TV and I see, Apple's release, let's say, I'm like, well, I'm not going to use that in my play. That's not where I work. So I just immediately forget about it. If I call in a vendor and we look at something, maybe they're showing me something for a different industry. I'm like, okay, I still can't see how I'm supposed to use this thing. Over time, we'll start to see more and more case studies and more ways of it working for different people. And so I think that's just I can't imagine what it may look like, at this point.
I'm going to bring it back to, for all four, let's connect some dots for the audience. So we're talking about all of this. How does this translate into how it helps the learning organization be more ready? Give the roadmap. Is it that we should be looking to throw out all of our technology? Is it that, we have to go back to school and get a PhD in data science? Like, where does this all come back to our audience? The learning and development professionals that are listening to this are coming in and saying, hey, listen, my learning strategy doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy. My overall readiness, I'm not really excited. I don't have a crystal ball to figure out future work. I'm hearing about all this tech stuff. How do we help the people in the audience? So let's take it one step. We've been talking tech for a while right now. What do? Pick new tech?
You enhance your current technology with new technology. Perhaps, test the waters in certain areas. There's VR is obviously one that I'm very, very into these days. And most people think the exact same thing that Greg was speaking to, in that they think, man, I got to buy headsets for everybody. I have to invest all this money. I have to do all these things. Actually not true anymore. You can create immersive content without ever having a headset available. You don't need to roll them out. You can use it in that way, but it doesn't have to be used in that way. So there are ways you can dip into things. AR is another one that can be done very cheaply if you have it on the job training while you're there. There are very inexpensive ways to go into that. Just trying new technologies, dipping in a little at a time and understanding. I think a lot of the problem is the examples we see, we only see the highest end, most expensive, biggest things out there. And that's not everything in that technology. There are ways to get into a technology by dipping your toes into the thing.
Right. And actually somebody, I think Liz is actually saying in the chat right now that tech is a tool, but it's not the goal, and that companies should first perform an analysis to see what they can do without initial high investment. A lot of resources are underutilized, which is actually a great point. And to me, just working at ELB, I always think about, why don't people take more trials of the training arcade and scenario VR? But it's like, it's kind of a circular pattern where somebody is so overtaxed and their team is so squeezed. But Liz does have a good point about looking first at the analysis. And there's another question here. Can screen-based media truly have the same impact as human-to-human interaction? Have you seen that in your roles? And if so, can you describe it? Or screen-based engagement strategies like games, VR, asynchronous videos, better for attraction and reinforcement? Oh, that's such a good question from Arden.
I can jump in on that one, Christy, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to answer that one, Arden. Thank you for the question. So one of the things in the organizations I've worked with over the last 20 something years is ramp time. Okay, so here I'll start with that as an example. Ramp time for salespeople, ramp time for customer success, interaction and engagement that way with the public or some sort of stakeholder. And the real issue there is scale. Like, how do you scale a manager who needs to coach? How do you allow peers to get in there? Now, one of the technologies I used years ago when it first came out, previous to it being acquired by ELB, was rehearsal. They were called rehearsal VRP originally, video role play. I used that in 3 different organizations where we were trying to help salespeople, for example, deal with customer objections, right? Common customer objections for specific products or whatever, or dealing with conflict situations with a customer from a customer success point of view. That was so successful because, one, it allowed for things like bloopers, right? So you could socialize that. It became a socialized activity, but it also got competitive. But it really helped people who were onboarding and ramping. And the reason being is because people could weigh in, right? People could see best in class answers. It felt comfortable being in a situation where it felt like they were looking at something specific, like a specific problem, getting the chance to fail quickly and getting feedback. And because it was happening in an asynchronous way, we were able to see that become a lot more productive and scalable for our organization. So yes, I mean, human interaction was there, but in an asynchronous way. But we didn't have to take anybody out of seat, out of field, and everybody had their own cameras because it could be done on mobile or on desktop. So there was a lot of advantages to being able to use that. And in the end, we ended up using rehearsal as a tool during our interview processes, right? So you'd have your interviews with candidates and they look great on paper. But then we'd say, you know, sit down in front of this. You're going to be asked 5 simulation-based questions from hypothetical customers, whatever the context was, sales or customer success. Do your best to answer these in the next 15 minutes. And that gave us insight into how these folks could think on their feet. So I've seen it done successfully and ran it. And that's just one example.
So let's put the debate on the table. So again, helping the learning and development group to figure out what to do. The big debate out there, we see it in the conversations that we have with organizations as well. Can you actually scale a learning and development team 2023 based on a people model? How much does tech actually play in? We have a lot of tech conversations that enhance learning itself. You know, as Arden brought up, you know, engagement, drawing in the learner, attractive to the learner. Let's go back office because that's who we have on the call today. On what do I do if I've got $100,000? Do I hire an instructional designer or do I go out and get a piece of tech? How does tech fit into the scaling and agility improvement for learning and development? Because that's one of the number one questions that we get asked now. Because can you do it with a people model anymore?
Yeah, and actually Liz is saying here, I think a good question is also to define what engagement is when it comes to learners accessing content, but also improving performance. Are people engaged when they spend more time in the learning tech? Does it matter? Or is engagement better defined as the lowest amount of time spent learning while producing the best output? And she also writes, a lot of tech makes it so that the learner is attracted to consuming more content. But is it also useful for the individual and the company? But those are some really good points on measurement, and you know, I'm sure Greg and John and Dre, I'm sure you have a lot of input to put input on this as well.
The key is you don't implement technology for technology's sake. You know, you don't gratuitously put VR in if it doesn't have a reason to be there. Don't gratuitously put in a game if it doesn't make sense with the modality that you're using. You need to make sure that it's solving the actual problem. You put in VR if the problem you're trying to solve is, you know, spatial awareness. And if you need them to be spatially aware, or you need them to be put in uncomfortable situations in which you can really only simulate via VR, right? So there are reasons to use certain technology, but only use them if you're solving that problem. And if you're creating a course on a spreadsheet, don't put it in VR. It doesn't make any sense then.
Right, but if you're using motor skills, for example, John, like for theft prevention, like Fendi client, for example, knowing where to look in the store and within a certain area, where to look for food safety issues, where to look in a factory, that's solving a different problem that just, and to Liz's point earlier, and to Michael's point, this stuff isn't scalable. I think when Greg was talking about rehearsal, it's asynchronous, but it's powerful, and not everybody, especially globally, is going to be on the same time zone where, you know, training in person. It's just not practical.
Yeah, and if I go, I'm going to go back to Michael's original question around, how do you implement the tech and do things like that? And what I can say, just from my experience and where I'm sitting right now, we actually have the opposite going on coming out of COVID. People want to be with each other. They want to start learning from each other right now. So we over-teched, compensated, I think, a little bit. And so where we're trying to lean in is say, well, okay, we know this, it's that paradigm shift, right? It's going to come back at some point, and we need to be scalable. But go and try some new technologies in some small pockets of the business with some small case studies, and let it grow virally, and do a little bit of guerrilla marketing internally, because change is hard. It is really hard, especially if you're working with inside of a very strong culture that thinks a certain way. So I think the question is, how do you make them feel like it was their idea? If I was at a startup and introduced a new technology, that's one thing. But if I'm with an organization that's 25 years old, that change management, I think it just needs to be thought through a little bit more. So maybe it's a partnership with John to say, hey, help me go find a small pocket where we got a really great case study that we know it's going to work. It's the perfect solution. And then let's go around the business and share it. Let's show them actually what it can do. Then they'll say, yes, I want that. I think that may be the best way to go about it. At least we're in our org. That's going to be the best way.
Let's cut a little deeper. So we've got the tech table set. So I think the jury's out. If I have to choose between a person or tech, there's still a lot of selection and process I have to go through. It could be scalable. It may not be scalable. It could be better to bring on a person. We don't have the answer. It's very situational. Let's go a step deeper. The audience weighed in, both as registrants and attendees, about the idea that their learning strategy is barely effective. And it seems to be symptom of, I'm not sure what I should be doing. I'm not sure how to address the challenges that are going on out there. Do you think that companies that are so steeped in instructor-led training and e-learning, do you think that that's making it too rigid to be able to address future of work?
Yeah, actually, and I'm seeing questions along those same lines, Michael. Well, one comment I see here is from Robert. I think you identify a key. Many of us aren't exactly sure where to use each tech capability, something which identifies where the tech is effective will be helpful. And I think we talked about people use, actually, Dre had a great example with rehearsal. And then Anna actually has an interesting question here. How do you get learners to start engaging in asynchronous learning? They say they prefer it, but really struggle to make the time for it. It's not great for live courses either, but at least when it's in their calendar, some of them show up. How do you influence learner behavior? It's a great question.
Yeah, Christy, that reminds me of, be careful what you ask your user. Because they may tell you that's a great technology. I love that. Let's get that in, and you turn it on and nobody shows up. Nobody uses it. And that's, for me, it's separating the modality and the technologies and things like that from the problem we're trying to solve. There's something also about, how do you, something around the learning strategy, and this is something we're challenged with all the time. We're quarterly driven, in a lot of organizations. So we're thinking about the now quite a bit. What's the thing I need to deliver now? If you think about our ROIs, our KPIs, and all the things that we're measured on, our bonuses, things like that at the end of the year, I'm going to look back at the last year at the work you did, the right now. Very few of us, I think, are conditioned to think about the next 2, 3, 5 years. That's a completely different skill set to think about. Well, no, I know in 5 years, I want a VR learning organization. I want it to have this and this and this and this and this. We're all thinking about what's the thing I can get done right now. Well, I know I can use this tool and this tool and this tool because we have them. And so everybody, it then becomes a task list, right? Check, check, check. Just start building, start going, go, 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 go. And sometimes we just don't have the time or the skills or the capability to stop and say, is this even got us going in the right direction for the 2 or 3 or the 4 years from now? Because we're just not conditioned to think like that many times.
That's very true. And actually, I am seeing in the chat that this is an issue too about, you have to get stuff done today, whatever. But, as Robert's also saying, well, which tech do you spend your time learning if you don't know how to correlate the type of learning needed and the tech, which can support it? So, and even Liz says it's crucial that the L&D community improves its understanding of tech first. Like, the application, I guess, of how modalities are used, if I'm reading that correctly.
Which kind of brings me back to the question that I brought up. You can't get around it, which is you've got a construct, putting it to the experts. And listen, 80% of learning is delivered through either instructor-led training or e-learning. This group is saying 90%. Knowing that you've got primarily a single modality as a weapon, and you've probably staffed to supporting that process, all of your learning measurement processes around that, your strategy is built around that from a modality standpoint. You've probably gone out and bought tech that aligns with that. Do we believe that that is the recipe for going forward for future work? Does that put the learning and development department in the right position? And I'm not asking rhetorically. I want everyone to weigh in on that, because that is the crux of the issue. And a lot of the tech, whatever makes it easier for the learner, let's face it, it makes it exponentially harder for the learning and development team. So they're enjoying the fruits of this multimedia bonanza. But the back office, if you've only got one tech administrator in your organization or two, it's a back office explosion as far as being able to manage that tech. So let's get into it. Like, can we go and be effective in the future of work as a learning and development team, leading with 90% of it's done through classroom training and e-learning?
But that's why you build partnerships, right? So, I mean, if your team is all their expertise based on just e-learning and working with things, you collaborate with an external partner. And maybe that's just an industry association. Maybe it's a partner like ELB, but it's, bringing in that expertise to upskill your own people so that those people can upskill their people. Right? I mean, that's where it comes down to.
I agree. And actually, Jennifer brings up a really good point too. Gamification, competition, leaderboards, that will motivate learners to do training, making it very fun. They want to be on top of the leaderboard, see their name in lights. And I think Gregg actually had some good examples of that. But to your point, John, that's where you might want to use a game template to build a game, or go to an expert, outsource to somebody who's really good at that, because I agree, it's you may not have that resource internally.
And then once you've built your first one, or once you've had your first one built for you, you can learn from that and then take that as a template to build further on. So it's just getting out there and getting a partner to bring new skills into your team.
Great. Dre, you guys want to weigh in on that?
I think part of it is looking at creating the experience first, right? Think about what the experience is. Don't worry about the technology first, right? Think about what do you want them to do when you look at your learning, when you look at your business objectives, you map those to learning objectives, and you start to figure out, okay, what do I need these folks to be able to do with this knowledge? Great. How do I craft an experience which allows them to practice something, or to just to run with it in the moment, and then so they can apply that afterwards? Then start mapping the technology. I give you an example of rehearsal, right? But there are other technologies out there. And one of the coolest things I've seen to be able to scale is where we wanted to create a classroom experience. We wanted the ILT feel, but we also needed it to be asynchronous. So how the heck do you do that? Asynchronous and synchronous. Well, what we used to do is we get small groups of people together, and we'd have a virtual instructor. They'd see a pre-recorded, broadcast of what they needed to learn as if they were in a VILT. And the team was given a set of time to work together to do all sorts of things. Some of those things could be games. Some of them could be an activity, some sort of research, and then they go through that and debrief. And then they watch the next virtual instructor. Why I'm telling you about that is that's us figuring out, okay, we need to broadcast and they need to do something. Okay, what technology can we use to map to that? versus saying, hey, we could start with something like a game, or we could start with something like VR and then build it from there. So I say focus on the experience. That's what's led to success for me in the past. And then build back. That way you'll learn as you go, and you'll find you'll be able to scale.
Yeah, that's great, Dre. I absolutely agree with you, and I'll add to that a little bit. It's almost like reverse engineering that experience, and I love that. And we'll do that. We use a lot of design thinking methodology to do that and think about that user, and a lot of user-centric design borrowed from the product world. And thinking pie in the sky. What is that experience? What is that best experience? And we like to lean into practice, intentional practice. How do we get that intentional practice? And then reverse it and say, okay, what technologies can we use? What modalities can we use? Sure, things are going to come off, but there may be one or two in there that you can use that you haven't thought of before. And then that's a good time to bring in a partner and say, you know, what's out there? Maybe it's a phone call to John or whatever, and say, what's out there that we're just not considering right now for these different spots? Because we're internal, right? We just get going so fast. We're insulated, and you know, we've got a good team that's been here for a while. So there are things that are going on that we just don't know about.
Coming from the programming world, I think of that as just being agile, adopting an agile methodology in anything you do, so that you know, as you're going, don't have everything mapped out all the way. Maybe you need to change it up as you're going. As you learn more about what you're doing, maybe a different modality might work, maybe not, but you maintain that agile frame of mind as you're going through the project.
Yeah, actually, that's another thing that Robert's saying, John. He's saying that most learning groups are very lucky if their staff is tech proficient at all, and now we need to make them tech agile, to your point. So that's a great comment. And actually, Liz is saying here, at least find a way for instructor-led training to improve learning, transfer, adoption, improvement of skills. For example, design learning and learning content and delivery in such a way to make it more conversational rather than one way, which is similar to what Gregg was saying. Companies don't have to jump into tech immediately. They can start with improving what they're doing already now. Yeah, so.
But so let's move off tech. Let's talk about the actual workload that's on the people themselves, which is, as we know, is probably 80% of everybody's learning budget. We know that people can't just keep hiring people to address future of work as a learning and development tool. We see that everywhere in every organizational setting, even outside of HR as a whole. So for folks that have the table set and they're looking to outsource, which was one of the key pieces, do you agree with that outsourcing mix? 47% outsourced training, 41% outsourced content, 60%. Is that the right mix of outsourcing to, say, a professional group like yours? Or do we need to change that mix around in order to help out the fact that we're probably capped on people? Our research shows that most learning organizations are working with 25% reduction in budget. And that has come through reductions in force, delaying hires, rescinding offers. That's where we're at. It's the more with the less. I don't want to lose track of that loaded question where 93% people said, yeah, I feel like the deck's stacked against us. So let's talk people. So how do we optimize people, and is outsourcing the right way to do it? Is there an organizational structure that is complementary to the people that are internally, and that it's not the first step towards business process outsourcing the entire group?
Yeah, I can just speak to how we're using them, Michael, and what we're trying to hold on to now. We're using that exact model where we are ideating, collaborating, creating the vision for whatever it is that we're trying to produce, and then bringing in contractors to help us with the builds, you know, and help us actually build the assets that we need. And then internally, the piece that we hold on to with our talent and understands culture and things like that is around the vision, making sure that that red thread is threaded through all of our stuff, you know, styles and feels and things like that, and staying connected to some of the other groups. And it's working pretty well. You know, it's working pretty well. We're finding that, you know, a lot of the contractors out there right now are they're great people, very skilled, highly skilled, can come in and hit the ground really quickly. As long as we keep it at that build. Now, if we ask them to do more and do things like get to know the culture, get to know the company, those things that kind of take a while to get through osmosis, then it becomes more challenging. There's a lot more startup time there.
Greg, I'm interested in what those percentage numbers are for your team, percentage wise. How much is outsourced? How much is internal?
Yes, for any big project right now, we may have one lead designer that's responsible for designing, and then they may have one internal builder and then two external builders. So it's probably 50-50.
Actually, speaking of outsourcing, Brandy has an interesting question here. She's asking, what are your thoughts on having a talent marketplace to build skills, which allows current employees to have opportunities to help in another area that may need the headcount or prepare you for a future position versus outsourcing? I think I understand that question, saying, okay, let me see. Does that make sense? Can you read that chat? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Dre, jump in on that. I'd love to get your thoughts because you're nodding in the affirmative there.
Yeah, so yeah, I think it's a great idea. At Google, we had something called 20% projects, and that was allowed people to sign up for a project that allowed them to use 20% of their work time for another department. So for example, we had a lot of folks coming in to help with different L&D or sales enablement projects, experts in their own right with different things, or they wanted to upskill and learn new things, but they brought a lot of value to the table. That diversity that they brought from their work experiences was great. And they ended up adopting a lot of the practices or getting to see under the hood of some of our departments, right? I think having an inventory of those skills, being able to put yourself out there, I think it's important, but also in a COVID or post-COVID world, you're seeing a lot of folks who really want to upskill. They care about that, right? And in the absence of having like the budget to outsource, because we certainly at Google and LinkedIn, we outsourced a lot of different things, but having an internal talent pool is incredibly helpful. And what you find afterwards is that it allows you to really spread out some of that work beyond the borders of L&D, because those folks carry those things back with them and you build those internal partnerships. So you can find other ways to scale, but it's a great idea and I've seen it done very well.
And I'll jump in there, Christy. We do something very similar. We call them farmers, and they're people that come out of the stores. Maybe they've been in stores for many years and they're incredibly bright people, and they join a program, and it's about the same thing. 20% of their time, they can come work in corporate in L&D and work with us, and we can have them bring them into projects and do things like that. So we may supplement, if you think about it, we got our lead designer, we may use, for example, a couple of people from ELB, and then we'll have maybe 2 or 3 farmers, and we've got a really good team there. And so that lead designer is just kind of holding that team together, running that team. And it's worked really well. And it's so successful. We got other parts of the world that are picking it up. And those farmers tend to go and move on into the company within the year.
Awesome.
Bringing it back to the ELB model for a second. We get a lot of organizations say, that sounds great. That's a lot of management time. I want to find a single source of truth where I can have a consolidated approach to having my learning organization be scalable. If it's a content issue, I go to one organization. If it's a training administration or resource, I have one organization to go to. If it's physically building content, getting tech administration done, we see this becoming also a vendor management problem. The ability to be able to manage these partnerships and individual pieces. So what's your experience in the value? We see overwhelmingly that people want to consolidate all of these choices and find a single source of truth. And Christy, I'm going to start with you on this because you get this question asked of you a lot from an ELB standpoint. How's that get answered properly for this audience?
Having a single source is nice. I mean, I think I'm going to sound biased though, because I work at ELB, but there's something to be said for having somebody understand your content needs and technology needs. So I think that is definitely becoming more of a trend. And actually, Kristen points out that, using internal SMEs, your own subject matter experts, has been incredibly valuable in a way to maximize resources. So if you have technology that makes it easy to share knowledge between your SMEs, for example,
Right.
or share knowledge between your vendors and your SMEs, that could actually be incredibly beneficial, because when your time is squeezed, having to repeat the same conversation to multiple vendors can be annoying. So I can see having one partner or a limited number of partners could be very effective. And actually, Patrick does point out that internal SMEs, the same thing as Kristen saying, are important, but SME does not equal training teaching ability. Correct. So that is a consideration. That's true. Teach them how to fish. Well, yeah. And then we talked a little bit about social learning. I think some of the beauty of that, mobile technology. And I'm just thinking about examples that I've seen where somebody's, fixing an antenna, let's say in the middle of the ocean. They take a video on their phone on the fly. And if you give them the opportunity to just share it out with people in the channel, okay, so they're not really great teachers, but then you have this visual proof of a video, just like not so different than having your board or your playlist on YouTube. And there's a lot of combination of the two, where if you give your SMEs the tools to make them better teachers, then you probably can leverage that. And actually Kristen's saying, but Gregg's SMEs are the boots on the ground, so management knows what and how to teach, plus where the gaps are. That is true. Yeah.
I think but I think you bring up a good point, and I'd like to throw this out to the group. Is we have a tendency to look towards that internal resource and say, hey, we have subject matter experts, but they have a day job and they're not necessarily trained as instructors. They may know a lot, but that would basically be able to say, just because you went to school, now instantly you can teach people what you learned. It's a whole different set of competencies. So I'm gonna raise a hand, call a question mark on that, and say subject matter experts are great weighing in on content, potentially make sure you get the right learning objectives. But is that really a scalable model in a VUCA environment? Don't we need? We have people come to us all the time during the pandemic, as an example, saying, my current instructors that are trained as instructors are struggling to convert to virtual instructor-led training, finding it's a different delivery modality and delivery approach, and requires a different set of skills in order to keep a virtual audience engaged. And we've seen that shift back to classroom training hasn't shifted significantly. A lot of people got used to this, like what we're doing right now. So what about looking to the outside to get an organization that has expertise in knowing how to deliver instruction properly, and maybe partnering on the content, but making sure that we keep it as a profession within the organizational structure, and be able to, what Gregg said, I think very eloquently, scale up and scale down at the need. Isn't that a good future of work consideration?
Yeah, and actually, Patrick is saying, Michael, that's my point about SMEs. We need to be careful on reliance on SMEs providing OJ, training until they are vetted as effective educators. That is a point on the job. Sorry, on the job training, correct. Okay. And actually Liz is saying it's an option to let juniors document what they're observing and only asking SMEs to validate the content created. Thinking out loud. That's an interesting way to share that. Yeah. But
Michael, I think it's, to go back to your original question, I think it's probably and or an all of the above, right? So I think it makes, we're not doing a lot of it right now, but in the past, in some of my past orgs, we would outsource facilitation when it came to leadership programs, high touch programs, things like that, where you wanted expert leaders actually facilitating. So we would outsource those things, but we wouldn't necessarily outsource onboarding, because in the onboarding program, they want cultural stuff. They want people from inside the organization to facilitate those things. And we finding the balance has always been the hard thing. And we are definitely going through the same, I think, pains as everyone else of this virtual instructor-led training piece, and how do we get our heads around that? And it's a good way. If anybody has the answer out there, that'd be great. But we're trying to figure out how to do that. And we hear from our users, they'd love to be together. We hear from our VILT people, hey, I'm not getting a lot of engagement. And so we're starting to look at that at this point, but it's only been about the past 6 months we started to hear that.
Now, on the ELB side, I think there's one more issue I want to tackle before we have to wrap up, and John will go to you on this, is I set the table and I fall in love with the fact that I want to do gaming. This is a question that comes up time and time again. I don't know how to build it. I don't have the expertise. So you got me at hello. I have to switch and start doing more games, more sim, more. I don't have the technical competencies or experience or expertise to build that. Internally, I want to take advantage of it. That's a golden opportunity to work with people from the outside to say, yeah, you can have someone do that for you, give the proper direction to it, leverage your expertise and what you need the outcomes to be. But wouldn't it be easier to work with someone from the outside to build that for you than trying to figure out how you ramp up in time, people wise, if you're trying to deal with both velocity and trajectory of how fast and how steep learning curve is becoming?
That touches back on what we got into before, which is collaborating.
Exactly.
With partners, right? So I mean, it is partners, but it's also associations. There are associations that they can look to for information on that. There's training providers. There's a lot of ways you can get into that, but the quickest way, obviously, is to bring in an expert from an external provider, and they can go in and train the trainer. There's a lot of it. It still accounts today. It used to be done in ILT, but it can be done a lot of ways.
That's really the key to all of this, right? Is being in the kind of wrap this up and put some final thought together from each one of you is for the audiences. We've got to think about the fact that future of work for all of us has to be a readiness factor. And there are organizational settings where readiness can be immediately achieved by getting help from experts like this on the outside. They're not necessarily looking to replace you, but to augment, to be able to give you that bandwidth, depth, and breadth at a moment's notice, and then to be efficient and effective of scaling up and scaling down. I think the experts here today have done an excellent job of giving, I think, a no holds barred objective point of view on that. So I'm going to start with Dre, just final thoughts for the folks that have stayed with us today. Where do you want to land?
Sorry, I was having an audio issue there. Can you hear me okay, Michael?
Yeah, yep, you're in.
Coming through. I think that my overarching thought is this: focus on the experience. Do tech trials. Get your people playing with the technology to find some inspiration. You'd be surprised. Most of the organizations I've ever talked to have tons of smart eggs, and they just want the ability to play and try new things. So if you can find the value in some of that technology so that they can play around, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by what's possible in terms of scale, value, and impact. So that would be my parting thoughts. And also, sorry, one last thing. Any firms, when you're thinking about multiple vendor, right, really get into the quality of what that firm brings to the table, right? There's lots of other ones, but there are some that differentiate themselves from others. And that goes with ease of use with how they operationalize, and also the ease of use of their technology. If it's simple to use and your people can get up and running, all the better. Thanks for having me.
Excellent words. Great, John.
Yeah, I'll jump in and then pass it, John. So I love Dre's sentiment. I would put that, as a number one, maybe number 1A. I'll speak to the talent side is, we went into this year and part of our strategy was how are we going to supplement or augment our talent? And we got our vendors on the phone and said, here's what our strategy is for the year. Here's where we see the peaks and the valleys. And can you start lining up some good people for us? And it's worked really well. We've had no hiccups up to this point. So we've been very happy with that. I don't see that changing anytime in the near future. So I would say, start sooner than you need them. What is a little bit more difficult when we call them at the 11th hour and say we need somebody on Tuesday. Sometimes you don't get the greatest talent that's available, but they've been very helpful.
Probably my final thing is that anytime you're setting up a new learning project, the thing that's always most overlooked is the analytics and being able to measure ROI, and you need to start with that. So when you're setting up your objectives, make sure they're measurable objectives. and then so that you can measure them at the end and use, this is where technology helps you out, things like XAPI. You can actually measure small details on there and see the business impacts of that going forward. And then when you get into your next project, if you can show that you save money or save time, it's much easier to sell your second project when you can show that you save money than your first project.
Christy?
Well, I just have to say kudos to everybody who not only filled out the questions, because you're already doing the right thing by even paying attention to this stuff, but just coming, because I think that when it comes to preparing for the future, it's hard to imagine what that looks like. And for me, I've had the luxury of just, walking the kitchen at Drevantis before we were acquired, and just listening to John at the foosball table just talk about stuff, and you can actually start to picture just hanging out with him. So we're doing a conference actually coming up, just an online free conference called ELBX, and it would be great to have y'all stop by. We'll send out some information on that, but yeah, and also to try things, not be afraid to try, not be afraid to use your imagination. But kudos to you all for coming, because you're already starting to prepare yourself for the future just by showing up and listening. So
I want to thank everyone for coming. First, start with our experts. Thank you, our audience. We know that your time is extremely valuable. We're pressed. When we do invest our time, we want real answers that we can get back to. I think it's been a great dialogue through the chat, so thank you. And let's do this. Let's check out Studio. Let's think about how we want to be able to exercise in some of these great ideas and thoughts that the team has shared with you today. Again, I'm Michael Rochelle for Brennan Hall Group. I want to thank you for coming, and I look forward to the next opportunity where we can engage in a great discussion. Have a great day.
thank you so much.